Mm-hmm.
I need to go grab lunch outdoors after this. I gotta go shopping, and I never want to go shopping on an empty stomach.
Where would we go to? Where would we go?
Technically.
We could go. I want to go to Broadway. There's a lot of.
You want to go to lunch with us, Daniel?
Fork 40 is good.
Fork 40.
You been there?
No.
Oh, that's good. That's just up on
I have to
State
set up
Street.
some home showings, but if
Well, tonight we got to do a meeting with Shemeketa, and Justin chose Red Robin, which is like.
Yes.
So our direction.
Okay, we're live.
Oh, we're live. Okay. Hey! Greetings and salutations. Good morning. Sorry, you got a little bonus coverage there. Welcome to the Agora. We are a forum to examine the unexamined life. We are the place where you talk about the things you might like to but are afraid to. We believe that the issues of faith, morality, ethics, and society are far too important to be solved through tweets, hashtags, celebrity rants on Instagram.
Share.
Pick your random social media term of the day. And we also believe that we live in a world that makes it easier to avoid discussing ideas with anybody you might disagree with. And that's what we're all about here, is coming together, not necessarily in total agreement, but in respect and dignity for those with whom we disagree.
But
So
you'll be in total agreement with me by the end of this.
we will be, clearly. Rob is going to bend our wills to his. So, by the way, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, yeah.
Our special guest today, Rob Toornstra?
Tornstra.
Yes. You will not guess how many people I've had ask me over the years exactly how your name is pronounced. So.
Well, you wouldn't believe how many people have asked me how my own name is pronounced and then go to proceed to pronounce it wrong after I've told them. So
Yeah, if I was,
I've answered just about everything.
if I was sending you a voice message and I tried to say Toornstra into my phone, I don't even want to know what's going to come up.
Well, you just have to sort of muffle it so it sounds like, then you can't blame yourself for pronouncing
Exactly.
it. Just blame the phone.
Are we to blaming inanimate objects for our life's problems?
Pretty much.
So Rob Toornstra, pastor at Sunny Slope Christian Reformed Church right here in Salem. You guys are back to having live service, correct?
We are. We're doing. We've got 50 in our sanctuary, and then we have a separate building. We got another 50 in capacity in there. So we're kind of ramping back up. We've got protocols in place, face masks, and all that good stuff. So we're getting there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great group of people. We've shared there multiple times our ministry work. If you're down in the Sunnyside, is it Sunnyside neighborhood? Is that?
No, Sunny Slope.
Sunny Slope. Gotcha.
Yeah. Sunnyside is in Washington. And I say that because we actually have a sister church up in Sunnyside.
I was born in Sunnyside.
Yeah, and we have a Christian Reformed church up there, and anyways, people get us mixed up, but we are Sunny Slope.
Okay.
Not Slippery Slope, as one of our members occasionally calls us. But,
I can see that.
No, we're Sunny Slope, down South Salem.
Wonderful. Go check them out on Sunday if you guys are looking. Oh, you need to register ahead of time.
No, not anymore. We did that when we were first starting back up again, but we've not had an issue with capacity. So no, you don't need to register ahead. Just come and show up and visit with us. We'd love to meet you.
Wonderful. So Rob is joining us today for one reason, because he's just a heck of a guy, but also because he's going to speak to our question that we want to examine today, which we'll get to in a little bit here. The question of, should we work to live or live to work? And I think that this idea has been especially brought to the forefront in light of the COVID world that we are now living in. Those who desperately want to work but are told not to. It seems like this paradigm has been flipped on their head, as opposed to us, the parent telling their lazy kid to get a job who doesn't want to work. Now it's the opposite in many cases. People being told and being paid in many cases not to work. So we're going to dive into that a little bit here. But before I do that, I do have a first world problem that I need to share with all of you guys to get your thoughts on this, on what a selfish jerk I am. So for those of you who did not notice or were desperately missing us over the last couple of weeks, we apologize. We were on vacations with our families, enjoying a little time away. So we're back here with a vengeance. And last week, Jessica and I and our two wonderful boys were out with my parents in Newport, Oregon. They own a timeshare out there, so they booked a room for us to come join them for the week. Wonderful little getaway. Weather was great. It was about 58 degrees every day, so that was probably, I know. When you're coming from 103, 58 and sunny at the Oregon coast, I'll take it.
No, sunny is nice. 58 is a little cool.
No. Yeah, it was sunny in 58. No. I got some sun. I'm sorry. What do you like, your Turkish sauna that you can just sweat to death in?
No, this first world problem's going in a different direction.
Hot. I like heat. I like dry, arid climates. I think I'm a desert person.
Oh,
I live in the wrong part of the country.
Totally.
Bend. But I would agree.
What's that?
100
go live in Bend.
Bend's still a little cold. I mean, I like heat, man.
Go live in Yuma, Arizona.
I just visited St. George, Utah, and that town is gorgeous. And It is super hot, but it's wonderful. Like, it's a dry kind of heat, which is totally different. It doesn't exhaust you in the same way that humidity does, where you feel sticky and gross.
I was just in Michigan a couple weeks ago, and the humidity there mixed in with the real high heat, that's unpleasant.
Right.
You change your clothes after you step out of the house.
Oh man, well you can't even, you shower and then it doesn't even feel like you
Worst feeling in the world.
Yeah.
Speaking of first world problems, but so anyway, so this particular one that I want to share with you. So normally, the resorts we go to with my parents, they all have in-room laundry. So we just kind of assumed this one did too. Get there, we're pulling up all the doors, all the cabinets and closets, and there's no laundry. So I am just downtrodden of the fact, what? I should have. Well, I have my abs. So
I want to see Garrett
I put my shirt against
washboarding
these and
his.
just grind it out.
You're like, Jessica, check out how strong I
I don't know if
am.
you heard I was pushing over 1,000 hours. No, dude, seriously, I don't want a washboard anymore. I want to. I've never actually used a washboard.
I'm sure my mother-in-law does.
Okay, well, let her know. We should bring it in as a prop for next week. Anyway, so we realize we get there and there's only laundry in the main office, and you have to pay like $1 or $1.50. And I just again got to thinking, we have the ability this day and age to throw our soiled clothes and rags into this machine, close the door, and press a button. Soiled?
I mean, I
have a 6 and a 3-year-old.
When's the last
We have a
time
lot
you
of
soiled your clothes?
It was soiled.
We have a lot of soilage. We're going through the potty training phase with our 3-year-old. There's much
understand.
soilage. So, soilage, I think I just invented that. But we have the ability to just throw that in there, press a button, and magically our clothes get washed. And then we have the ability to chuck them in another device, close another door, press a button, and they come out magically dry. So, am I really that put out that, for a week, we may have to walk a couple hundred feet and pay $1 to do that? So, I don't know. Although we have been, I think you guys have had this joy too, where you've had times where your washer and dryer are on the fritz, and it's no fun.
It's a pain.
It is.
It's a pain.
You have to get quite creative, but we will go on. Somehow we will survive. We will endure the loss of a washer and dryer temporarily. So that was my first world problem experience of this week. I don't know if you guys could speak to that, or if you had any of your own you wanted to share.
So yeah, your story reminded me of a time my wife and I were working for a summer at a camp. It was actually a conference center, so it was where families would come for a week, and they spent pretty good money to stay the week at this conference center, and there's swimming pool and a beach, and it was a great place. Yeah, it was like the Hilton of Christian conference centers. So and then the high-end people would stay in these really large, like condo/houses. And one of our jobs as workers there, we had to go and clean these houses. So, like all Saturday was spent cleaning, getting ready for the next group of people that come in on Sunday. So my wife and I are going through this really large house cleaning, and we get into the kitchen, and there's this long handwritten note. And we're thinking, okay, maybe it's like a thank you for all that you've done. Maybe it's like, hey, we just want to appreciate, all the hard work. And we start reading it. And it's this, this was nice, but you know what? We were missing a colander, and we couldn't make our spaghetti the way we wanted.
Who hasn't tried to do the hand drain or the lid drain into the sink, and then it all spills out? Been there.
So yeah, it's a first world problem, man, because these are things. If you go on vacation, if you go camping, you don't get, you have to forego those things. So
unless you go glamping.
I suppose. My wife is camping this weekend with my 2 younger kids. They're out at this farm out in Staten, and it's like one of these. Yeah, wonderful. It's one of the things, you get to milk the cows if you want to, kind of thing. So it's this whole rustic. There's no in-room wash and dryer there, I assure you.
Getting back to nature.
And there's lots of soilage too, by the way. I'm sure.
I'm gonna try to bring that into the mainstream vernacular, soilage. Well, Richard, I know you're routinely complaining when your moat dries up and you have to refill it around your house, and and then when COVID hit, you had to cut down to only 9 house servants, in order to not be above the 10-person limit. So I know how much you've suffered.
Anymore.
Oh.
Yeah, it was tough. It's very tough.
At the Richard estate, the palatial estate.
The Richard estate.
All
of that, by the way, is totally a joke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cross the drawbridge to Ferradinos Manor.
What's that?
The Ferradinos
I don't know. I'm a bad Greek.
What's house in Greek?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I took it in seminary. Why?
I just found a bunch of my old Greek vocabulary stuff. I've been doing a remodel.
Koine Greek is almost it's totally different than modern Greek.
Hebrew is base.
I just thought it was funny. I had like the silver can of all the Greek words.
Bethlehem.
Yeah. Jesus was born in the house of bread.
In the house of bread, as was Ruth and
David. Yeah,
it's kind of interesting considering his analogy to.
Oh wait. Okay, so oikos is household.
Yeah, oikos.
That's family, but as far as the physical dwelling, I don't know. So yeah, oikos is household, like family.
But that's Koine Greek, right? That's not modern Greek.
That's probably both. I mean, there's some carryover, I think.
Yeah. No, that is because the oikos formula refers to the idea of household baptism. So when they talk about like all members of the household, they refer it to the oikos equation. The term oikos is used for household, like in Philippians 6, or in Acts 16, the Philippian jailer in his household, his whole oikos were baptized.
Isn't economics is also oikos nomos?
Yes.
Right. So it's the
laws of the household.
Spiti.
Is that modern?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's modern.
Spiti.
Yep.
Spiti.
No, it's a language of your people. You speak it better, or half your people.
I grew up in America. I'm sorry. Language of the land.
I do love. Speaking of first world problems, I love how we complain about those who come here who don't speak flawless English when we are the worst in the world at learning new languages.
My dad has told me that one of the interesting things he kind of knew when, like, he said it was interesting. He dreamed in Greek for most of his life, and then he was here long enough.
He dreamed in Greek?
He dreamed in Greek. Yeah. No, but think about this. This just tells you something about your brain and what its main mode of understanding the world is, right? So he dreamed in Greek. And I think he said it was when he was here about 20 years, it finally, like, flipped.
It switched.
And he dreams in English.
Do you dream in Canadian, Rob?
Sure, yeah. I apologize a lot in my dreams.
Oh, really?
I know that's a Canadian thing.
Yeah.
You know.
Way to fulfill this. Yes. Thank you, a wise.
There's another first world problem, right? You don't have a word that you know, and you just pull it up right on your phone. You can translate it right there.
Exactly. The world is becoming a much smaller place.
Thank
so
you
the
for
stereotype of the nice Canadian is true.
I'm going to tell you something. This is an honest,
and then we'll dive into some
then we'll get into
seriousness.
this is honest truth. There is a law on the books in Canada that says if you're in a car accident and you apologize to the other driver, that apology cannot be held against you in legal proceedings for the purpose of insurance, right? Because so here, I mean, in America,
you acknowledge you did something wrong.
If I get into a car accident and I say I'm sorry, and it turns out it's not my fault, they could say, well, but you apologized at the scene, and right. So, but in Canada, they actually have it as a law that, and it's I forget what they call it. They have a funny name for it, but no, it's you can apologize without fearing that it's going to be held against you. Because Canadians are known for being really good apologizing.
Visit Canada? Oh, we can't. That's right.
No,
that's something to be ashamed of. I mean,
I think it's a good thing.
Hey, we're really nice people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great thing. It's a great thing. It's
I think that would be amazing.
Yeah.
We
could use a little bit more of that.
We could use a lot more of that. Yeah.
We actually walked into Canada last summer. We were in Niagara Falls for a conference.
By the way, the view is much better from the Canada side.
Of Niagara Falls?
Yeah, I hate to tell everyone that, but like,
it is,
you're above the falls on the New York side, but then you go over to Canada and it's like the perfect view.
I've never been to Niagara Falls, believe it or not.
And the town. They had like a go-kart track that went like 3 stories high. It was super cool, and all these.
I just about got kicked off go-karts about 3 weeks ago. I got my final warning. They said
Pat's Acres?
No, this was in Michigan.
Oh.
Yeah, I was causing a few pile-ups on the go-kart track, and they lectured me and said, if we have to tell you again, we're going to boot you out.
It's a badge of honor. I was once kicked
I was
off a
quite
go-kart
proud
track.
of it. Yeah, I didn't feel too bad. I should have maybe, but you know.
Oh, by the way, if my wife's watching, yes, I will pick up string cheese, healthy prepackaged snacks, OJ and milk on my way home. So I love you, dear. I love the boys. We have missed string cheese snacks for the kids. Those things are gold at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
And we've been out of them temporarily. So yes, I will get that on the way home. Love you lots here. Okay, so we could dive into this for hours, the first world problems and the glories of the magical far-off land of Canada. But we do want to get to some serious matters at hand. So the viral exam not the viral exam, the cliche of the day that I want to dive into today, for those of you who've watched before, we talk about how cliches are not cliches because they're necessarily untrue. They're cliches because they don't necessarily tell the whole story and they're more complicated. Exactly.
Like axioms.
Yeah.
Like little nuggets of truth. That's
Exactly.
what a cliche is. It's a common language axiom that people will say as a common language way of bringing a principle into light. That's literally what a cliche is.
You're trying to draw to mind the bigger scope, I would think.
Right.
Yes.
So
the cliches there's an element of truth to them and an element of value, but a lot of times we reduce the complex problems of the world to cliche. And like we talk about in this show, in many formats, these things are always more complicated and nuanced than we can solve through cliches or, again, through hashtags, through memes. So what I was thinking about today, that I've heard this a lot of times, especially in ministry circles, especially in congregational circles, the cliche that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So in other words, unless people realize that you love them and you care about them and that you have their best interests looked out for, they don't care what you have to say. And again, on the surface, I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's value in demonstrating to somebody, hey, you might not quite understand what I'm saying, but I want you to know that I care about you, I have your best interests looked out for, I love you, and I want you to thrive and flourish. So because of that, I want to tell you X, Y, and Z. And there's certainly an element of truth to that. At the same time, you can have somebody who cares about you a ton but has really terrible advice and doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. So I just got thinking about this, in the sense of we obviously have a balance. I have a lot of people in my life who care about me deeply but aren't knowledgeable in a particular situation, aren't knowledgeable to give advice to a particular situation. So
knowledge is different than wisdom too.
Exactly. Having good information should be priority to having good wisdom, I guess. But, learning how to apply that good information that you have. So again,
I think sometimes also there's a lot of people who offer to give information because they feel like they want to help. The only way that how to help is to give say something, do something. And I don't know, I've rethought that a lot after experiencing some pretty intense trauma in life. Is sometimes you just need to sit with people and shut up.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I mean, look.
Sometimes you don't know the answer.
The biblical story of Job is helpful that way, right?
Absolutely.
Because you actually the three friends, they get a terrible reputation. It's kind of deserved because 98% of the time they're on the scene, they're doing all the wrong things. But there's that little bit at the beginning where that's all they do. They come for like a week and they just sit with Job and just presumably listen or just sit with him.
Well, they don't say anything.
They don't say anything at first,
yeah.
and maybe Job was talking. It doesn't really say, but there's a lot of truth in that. We sometimes just want to tell people.
I do think there is something to say though, as far as I think if you want to effectively communicate an idea or even opposing principle to something someone may think, I do think it's important that they know that you care.
Oh, of course.
Because I think it changes the way the message is received versus I have no care of how you receive this. I think it also changes your demeanor, I think, through the idea of loving your neighbor as yourself kind of idea, that I want somebody to know that I care about them enough that what I'm going to say to them is meaningful and valuable, not just that I think I'm right and that's the only thing I care about. And I think there's some nuance there to where a lot of people I know, I would argue a lot of social media is this way. I'm just going to share this. I don't care who thinks about it, and I don't care how they, because they're wrong.
And they don't want you to know.
And I don't care if you're left or you're right. Everybody does it.
Everybody does it.
And so there's this lack of hey, I don't want people to be hurt by the things that I say. I want them to understand it. And so there's this idea of hey, if I would rather spend the time showing someone I care and then being able to speak than just saying this is the right answer and you need to know it.
Yeah, I mean your credibility I think goes a lot higher when you have demonstrated or are demonstrating that your knowledge in a manner that comes across as genuine and sincere and caring. I mean, I hear that from some members of my church. One of their complaints when they go into the hospital or experience some kind of a medical issue or concern is, if the doctors or the nurses are just pure textbook kind of people, then they experience that disconnect, because then they feel like they're being treated as a as a collection of symptoms rather than as an individual. So in fact, there was a thing on Nextdoor. The Nextdoor is like the Facebook app for communities, and
there's some good stuff.
It's really interesting. Although it's like, there's a whole lot of
I feel like it's the guy on it, and I feel like it's just a neighborly gossip.
I think at its worst, that's certainly what it devolves into.
Do you want to know what your neighbors are saying about you?
No, they just complain about
this. Kvetching about
stuff.
Your
literally.
But the reason I brought it up is because like last week, someone in my neighborhood posted, "Hey, I'm looking for a doctor," and they went on and on about how they wanted someone who's going to be personal and care about me and don't just treat me as symptoms. And I was a little sort of two minds on that. I thought on the one hand, I think there's something really valid there, and that really says a lot about how I think we do want, in medical fields, but I think in a lot of other ways, we want to know that we're cared for. But the other side of it is, you want someone who really is attentive to the symptoms and to the problems. In other words, if you have a doctor who's very warm, personal, and caring, but knows very little, maybe time for a new doctor, right?
Exactly.
and so or doesn't connect the dots in such a way as to accurately diagnose your cancer.
Or is too emotionally connected. There can be. I once had a
6 months I went undiagnosed.
Oh.
Yeah.
You only had a softball size.
And I yelled at the guy and told him, and he was, anyway, long. Yeah, I would take the doctor any day who's not very nice, but who
knows their stuff.
Who knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Especially if they're operating on you. And we had a situation, we had to take when I was living with some gentleman up in Vancouver, we had to take one of our roommates to the ER because he was having some breathing problems. Turned out to be okay, but a couple of my other friends there noticed just how kind of callous and disconnected the lady checking them in was. And I said, well, put yourself in her position. If she gets emotionally torn up every time you can't do that job.
Right.
So there is a certain amount of when you're dealing with death and pain and illness,
suffering,
you do have to be able to disconnect somewhat.
Which is probably why you see that kind of attitude come through in a lot of high trauma jobs.
Yeah.
I just would imagine you just can't. It would be exhausting.
Well, and there's certainly, and this kind of bleeds into our question of the day a little bit, there's certainly lines of work where if you are a naturally empathetic person that has a harder time separating, they're more beneficial to that. I would argue that, yes, being an emergency room physician is not necessarily one where if you are an overly empathetic person who weeps and mourns. Yes, you're gonna have a tough time in that job.
It's gonna burn you out.
Exactly, when you're encountering death.
By the way,
and disease and destruction.
We need to have David come back on, Dr. David, and
that
guy blew my mind. We dissected how brains think and why people why is it that some people feel everything in the world? It has to do with your anatomy and the way the nerve endings actually run through your heart and how they're connected to your brain because they're connected differently. And he went through all the brains. It's amazing. He literally blew my mind.
That was several shows ago. We had
I'll look that one
David
up.
Manning.
Well, we didn't talk about it on the show. I met with him afterwards and I'm just trying to learn. And I was like, what do you think about personality tests? And he goes, no, there's way better stuff than that. And he dives into brain scan imaging and why, and the way how you think and. For example, a lot of people lose train of thought with me, and I never understood why, because my brain goes a million miles an hour. And he said it's because of the way that you're right brain dominant, macro to micro thinker. And he's like, it goes up and down, up and down, up and down, meaning I can zoom out to see the macro and then zoom right in to see the micro, and people can't follow you. And then he explained why that is and why other people think linearly or think black and white. It depends on which side dominant you are and which hemisphere you think with the most in the dominant. Mind-blowing, and I've never heard it before. So I was
cool.
Yeah.
We'll get you his contact info afterwards.
So we just need to have him back on so we can literally explore that.
But he's a Christian. He's actually a pastor also at Salem Eckley. He was he did his MDiv first, went through seminary, and then went on and did his doctorate in counseling.
700 postgrad.
Yeah.
In neuroscience. Wow.
And so the idea that we were talking about is trauma care, how trauma affects our psyche. Yeah. And he combines both the biblical perspective on it and says that, you look at the way your brain is physically wired to the material process, and it lines up perfectly. And he spelled it out 1,000 times better than I could have. And I think that this is something that the Christian world is starting to wake up to, the fact that the mind and the soul and the body are not disconnected. There's an absolute connection between the two, and incorporating, counseling and trauma-informed care with spiritual care as well. And anyway,
yeah, that'd be fascinating.
You guys should get together and have coffee.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be fun.
So that transitions us a little bit into our question of the day here. Now that we have a good ripe hour and 5-minute segment. Sometimes in the first couple of weeks we would leave like 20 minutes at the end. So we've tightened the belt a little bit over the last few weeks here, because I want to talk about this. This is something very close to my heart. And again, Rob, I'll let you share a little bit about your perspective and why we brought you on to talk about this. But the question we want to examine today is, should we work to live or live to work? So the impetus for the title of this question was from a girl I used to date who was from Pittsburgh originally, moved out to Portland. And she literally said this. She's like, a huge difference I've noticed between the East Coast, or the Rust Belt kind of where Pittsburgh is, and then the West Coast here. She said out there, people seem to live to work. And out here on the West Coast, they seem to work to live. Take that as you will, as a positive or negative.
Before we jump in, can we just give our natural tendencies? I think that would be fun. In other words, on that spectrum, right? If your whole purpose in life is just to have a job and work, or your whole spectrum in life is to working just so that you can do whatever you want, where are you on that spectrum? That'd be an interesting discussion.
I'm somebody who I know for a fact if I go to bed at night without a sense of accomplishment, it tears me up inside. Like the idea of just doing nothing. Now there are creative ways to do nothing. But the idea of if I didn't better myself in some way, or I didn't accomplish something, whether it's physically, like days I don't get a workout in, like you can ask my wife, the days I'm able to work out in the morning and physically, help my body, help my health, there's a huge transitory effect in how my psyche is. I'm nicer to be around. I'm more pleasant. Or if I can get a ton of, I do. No, it's true. I get cranky, and then I drown my sorrows in ice cream or donuts, and it goes away. So
then you have to work twice
exactly,
the next day
that's the whole process. So I just know for a fact it's the idea of just relaxing and being is really hard for me to do nothing.
David. So yeah, I'd be the same way. I think.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I was thinking of David first. My apologies.
That's all right. I've been called a lot worse. No, I kind of share that. I'm one of these people. So even I got it on my phone. When I take a week vacation, I just getting back from vacation, and so 1 week was traveling in Michigan. Then the second week was like a staycation kind of thing. And I'm one of these guys that creates a checklist for my vacation. So I've got all these things that and they're not even like jobs that I need to get done. Like some of it's like, I want to take my daughter doing a driving lesson, and I want to take my other daughter out for dessert. So I have all these things that, and there's this sense of like, oh man, this was a good vacation because I got all these things done. And so I'm on a date with my wife, and I'm like, hey honey, look, we got our date.
No, I gotta hear Daniel's response to this, because mine will be polar opposite of his. It'll be great.
No, I don't understand that at all. The whole point of
okay, so you and I just went on vacation, and my wife is like, I'm just happy to go away and just not do things. To me, I literally go into panic mode of well, what are we gonna do? And so this balance of I wanted to plan out the days, and I wanted to know what we were doing each day, when we were doing something. And so I found that right balance of I need to be a little bit flexible, but to me, it's actually psychologically painful. If I just went somewhere and didn't know what I was doing each day, I would wake up in a cold sweat of what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to?
And I
there's
think,
got to be
I
something
think I
to
would,
do.
I think if I say went away to the coast, I think I could probably pull back a little bit and say, okay, we'll take each day as it comes, because we're in this setting, right?
Well, and also it's something that's only an hour and 20 minutes away, versus. So I think there's an element too of we're at we're in the Caribbean, so we got to do all these things we can't do at home. We got to go snorkeling. We got to go. We got to.
How I would see
exactly. We're at the Grand. We have to do this.
Home. I got
I would. So a few years ago we did take a vacation out and we were in the Caribbean, it was still take each day as we come, and some of it was like, hey, we're just gonna lounge today, and then it was like, we want to take a day and go into the city, and but that is something something I have to discipline myself towards. It's not something, the idea, say, of going to a cabin in the woods and just doing nothing.
Let's bring a stack of books and.
I mean, I would need to do I would need to have a lot of stuff to do.
Yes.
And so I've got colleagues that talk about going on these retreats, and
I want to hear Daniel because I'm glad he has a totally different perspective.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on this?
I'm sure. Hope and him would be.
I mean, I would like to just go and not have any plan on the agenda at all, and then just figure out what I'm going to do as I get there. And if I'm on the way and I see something, then I'll go and do that and not even get to the destination sometimes. I don't know. My wife would like to plan stuff out, and it's like she's like, I want to plan so we know that there's something going on. No, because my wife is like you guys.
Well, I know.
Daniel's wife is more like me. Okay.
Yeah, I wonder. The same personality as me. Where I think my wife is more like Daniel in that. So she.
My wife is more like.
So is my wife.
I just want to go somewhere, and I'm fine if I can just relax and just kind of do some basic things. Where it's like, no, there's missed opportunities. Like on our trip, I was like, we got to go to Zion one day. Where we're in Utah. How can we?
And
I was trying to fit it in, and I was like, no, we're going this day, and we'll wake up at 5 a.m. to make it happen.
So I went on this trip to Michigan, and we did, it was every day there was something to do. Now, I didn't have to worry about any of the scheduling. It was pure Michigan.
I love those
pure humidity. But so I didn't have to worry about the schedule because someone else was all, they all had it kind of planned out. And then, but then you get back, and I feel like I need some days to just sort of relax. I still have stuff I want to get done, but you need time to actually rest up. And
that's a real thing.
it's like, anyway, so.
I think you have to answer the question, are you going to go on a vacation for an experience, or are you going on a vacation to relax?
Yeah.
And to me, that's a totally different thing. An experience is more exhausting, because if I have to go through and plan things and stuff, I would want to be invested and experience it. But if I want to get away from experiencing, then I don't want to plan. I don't want to be in a schedule. So I guess there's two different, you have an intent and a motive.
I guess I always want to go. I think that's where I go.
Yeah. 1 or 2 days doing something, and then maybe 1 day to rest, and then back at.
Well, and I think too, for us, vacations with children, I've had to adjust. I have a 6 and a 3-year-old, and I have to adjust and say,
A vacation with children is not a vacation.
Yeah. We went out to the coast. I brought my bodyboard and my wetsuit. I brought my golf clubs. I brought stuff for hiking. Never.
Did you? I was going to say, you probably never
Totally.
No, never took it out.
I disagree with you guys. The last vacation I went on with all my kids was super fun.
You don't have 2-year-olds.
I'm not saying it's not fun.
I have a
saying
3-year-old.
It's different.
It's different. It's not. It's still
disagree.
Fun.
It's fun in seeing them have great, seeing our kids splash in the water on the beach and just.
I don't know. I planned our whole vacation around the things that I could do with them, like riding bikes, doing trails, going to Zion. So I feel like we were able to do things all the time as a family that were really, really fun.
But that's different from, say, if I were to, because again, my oldest is 14, almost 15 now, and if I think back 6, 7, 8 years ago, if I were to plan a vacation and say, I'm going to take a couple of days and do this because I want to do this. I'm not into golfing, but just say I'm going to go golfing one day, or I'm going to go. Number one, my wife would probably kill me, because then it would be like me. Oh, by the way, honey, you take the kids this day, and so I can.
Give her a day.
I suppose you could do that. That would be good. But I think it does change. Like when our vacations when we were younger, we had to be more. We had to structure around, say, nap time, and now it's like. Precisely. Yeah, I don't know. Both are good, but it's just different. I found.
Yeah, like my wife, because we went to Cabo for our anniversary our first year. My parents gave us a gift for a week there, and it was great. We went back in, we loved the spot, and Jessica said, "What if we took the kids with us?" And I said, "That's not the type of when they're old enough where they can be playing around and I'm not having to watch them every moment. You're right. That's not something I would choose to allocate resources to." With our kids right now.
I don't know. My experience has been totally different. I took my kids to down there.
Well, you're just super dad. So.
No, I'm just saying. I took them down there and I had a blast and hung out and did all sorts of stuff.
But would it have looked different if it was just you and your wife?
Is there an element of
yes, but I don't know that.
Not better or worse, just different.
Yeah, sure, but it would take an immense amount of
Here's the thing. You have an idea, a plan. You structured your vacation. If I want to go on vacation and not have a plan, the kids are an antithesis to that, because kids require you to be engaged, to plan, to have nap times. You have to feed them. If I don't eat, I don't care, because I don't. Sometimes I won't eat. They have to eat or they become monsters. So I have to be engaged 24/7 with children, and it's just like that's not. Well, you have a very different look on life.
Yeah, seriously.
I didn't say any of that. I'm just saying my experience is different.
My kids never run away.
My kids don't get hangry.
Seriously.
I don't have to worry about them.
There's a large chunk of truth to that.
Rich, you're just better at life than us, and that's okay.
8-10 years older than all my kids.
There is an element of that, yeah.
Well,
Have you guys gotten the remote control with the collar yet? No, you don't?
The shock
No, I'm just kidding.
The shock collar?
I'm more of a free-range dad, you know. I give parameters for my kids to run around, and, you know, as long as they keep on the navigational buoys, you know, I'm not a helicopter parent.
Walls everywhere, and you're just like, as long as you're within the padded zone.
I tell the oldest, I say, if you see any blood coming from the youngest, let me know, you know. If
right.
Just come tell Daddy. Daddy will be in the other room doing something, and if it gets really bad, come let me know, and he usually does. So,
I think if we were to get back on track, we want to ask the question: do you work so you can go have vacations, or do you just is work your like your life?
Okay,
and you really enjoy it?
I used to be a workaholic,
Fair
so
point.
I think I've moved away from the work to somewhere in the middle.
So just bring us back to the idea, and thank you, Daniel, for keeping us on the navigational buoy, so to say. So Rob, the reason why we want to have you on today to speak to this idea, other than just the fact that you're a swell dude or an awesome guy, is that you actually have some professional expertise in this field. So share with our audience what your experience is in regards to vocation.
Yeah. So. About 8 years ago, I started doing a doctoral degree, and part of that is you have to write a dissertation. And it's like, okay, so I'm thinking, what am I going to write on? And it was at that time that there was more stuff that was coming out, books and articles and that about the importance of work. And so I started thinking about work and Christianity. How does that all fit together? And so there are a few things that all kind of happened simultaneously around the same time. One of them was I was at a luncheon where it was business people and some Christian pastors and Christian leaders up in Portland. And one of the guys that was there said, you know, I got the sense, and he was a business owner, and he said, you know, my sense was that my pastor really only cared about my work when there was like a fundraising drive. You know, they needed to, you know, capital campaign or something. And then all of a sudden the business owner is really good because they generate a lot of income and they can give lots of money to the church. And he said that just bothered me a great deal, understandably so. But there's no, you know, again, there comes back to that question, does the pastor, how much does the pastor actually care for the person and for what that person's life is all about? And he says, what that person can do. So he said that really troubled me, and then I started to hear other kind of things like that. And now, around that same time, I was watching that show with Mike Rowe. You remember Dirty Jobs? Yeah. And Undercover Boss. Those two shows were kind of big at that time. And both of those shows kind of together, they focus on the whole question of work and the meaning of work and the value of work, whether it's, you know, sweeping, cleaning out sewer systems, or whether it's, you know, running being a CEO of a large company. And so I began to wonder the question of how do Christians look at the importance of work? What is it? Why do we work? What is it in the biblical story? Where does work fit in? And I started to talk to people about, you know, just asking them about, you know, what is their work all about? And this was people both in and out of my church. And a lot of times what I would hear is, you know, I would try to get at the question, what does it mean to be a Christian at work? And how do you do your work as a Christian, and so on and so forth? The responses that I would get were really twofold. I would hear, you know, and I sort of boil it down to tell others about Jesus and don't steal the paper clips, right? So in other words, when you are a Christian in the workplace, what that means is, number one, you should use it as an opportunity to evangelize, right? You've got all these coworkers that you're rubbing shoulders with. You're spending probably 40 or 50 hours a week. That's more time than you spend with your family and in your community. So take that as an opportunity to share Jesus with them, invite them to church, and that's what God wants you to do. That's how you can use your workplace. Number two was, and I say don't steal the paper clips because it sort of gets to that idea that you're as a Christian, your moral conduct is to be exemplary, down to the very little details. Like, not only are you not embezzling millions of dollars from your company, but you're also going to be so scrupulous that you don't steal even the paper clips, right? So that was what I was hearing a lot of, but then I began to think there has to be more to it than that. I mean, when you see these, CEOs and they get into the, on Undercover Boss, and they go into their companies and they actually begin to, you hear these stories of people and the work that they're doing, and when you see, Mike Rowe getting into the real nitty-gritty kinds of stuff, and it's almost a moving experience. And so I'm beginning to think, how do you, as Christians, have we lost that? And in particular, I mean, I'm a part of the Reform branch of the church, which historically has put a lot of emphasis on the idea of vocation. Yeah. That we don't divide life into sacred, going to church and reading your Bible and praying, and secular, which is everything else, right? And historically, the Reformed tradition has tried to bring those two things together and say all of life is lived before God, all of life is sacred. We're to do everything in a way that brings glory to God. So that does include, when you have appropriate opportunities, you talk to people about Jesus, and you don't steal the paper clips, but your work itself is to be something that is done in a way that has value and meaning.
There's a sacred and an unsacred way to do everything. Right. Not just to do church, but to, serve food at a restaurant, to scrub toilets. Right. There's a God-honoring way. There's a God-honoring way that I can change my child's diapers.
That's right. That's right. And so I thought, well, I want to dig more into that. And so what I did, part of my doctoral research then became going to work with people. And I actually went to, I job shadowed people. So I kind of did the undercover boss thing. A number of the members of my church invited me to go and join them in their workplace. So I went, and sometimes it was just, if you're working in an office, there's not necessarily a lot that you can do, but I would at least sit down and have conversations with these people. So I sat down with lawyers, and I went on a truck driving route, and I was in an English literature class and a special education classroom. I visited an artist in her gallery, and so and I began to see how people loved the work that they were doing and saw the meaning and the importance in it, and then I wanted to try to connect that to the overall Christian story, and so studying what does the Bible actually teach about what work is and why it matters. How does our work then fit into that larger story? And so I committed to researching that and to studying that, and I wrote my dissertation on, in part, it was about how do then, because I was writing on the topic of preaching as well. I wrote, how do preachers, do they do a good job of connecting with the people who listen to them in ways that influence them in their workplace? And unfortunately, I found that actually in many cases it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. So I started to write a little bit about how can preachers do a better job of that. But I also then spent a lot of time studying just a theology of work, and that's what sort of, anyways, that's what kind of came out of it. So,
and I agree with you. I love the part about how they never care about what your parishioners are doing, how their jobs are going, until the take is a little bit low and you need them to up their offering. Right. And I absolutely agree with you on that. And I think that. So Richard and I have a mutual friend. He passed away this last year, unfortunately. Wonderful, wonderful gentleman. He graduated from Multnomah School of the Bible back in '62, or I think a long time ago. He graduated with Luis Palau, actually, in the same class. And he told a story about when he graduated. A lot of his professors and advisors are saying, okay, so what are you going to do next? Are you going to go into church work? Are you going to go to seminary? Are you going to go to the mission field? And we basically said, well, actually I have this opportunity to go into business, building houses and doing property development. And he's talking about how they kind of, gave him the cold shoulder of like, oh, that's nice. We'll go do the real ministry work. You go. Well, fast forward, all that gentleman did over the next 50 years was build, a thriving company that employed, dozens and dozens of individuals across multiple states. By the time he passed, he was worth tens of millions, and he gave away so much. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of thousands every year. There are whole organizations that would not exist. There's a university in Africa, a Christian university in Kenya, that he basically helped found because he was so successful in the work that God had given him. And and not that it's an either or, but I mean, in the case, you could say he did more kingdom impact by building houses and doing property development and being a good steward than, the guy who graduated and went to pastor a small country church. Not that one is better than the other.
Right. And I think that's a really, really helpful example because it gets at a couple things. Number one, it gets at that hierarchy that we create, right? And you picture it as a triangle where at the top, you've got like the mission. This is a false hierarchy. I want to be clear about that, right? So at the very top, you've got the missionaries, and they give up everything, and they sacrifice their comfort and they go to these really poor and then just below that, you've got ministers because they're devoting their life to preaching the gospel and working in the church, and that's what God cares about. And then below that, you've got Christian school teachers and sort of like parachurch workers. And then below that is everybody else, right? And youth pastor kind of fits in there, but it's this hierarchy where we sort of measure a person's work. So the illustration that you use about Multnomah Seminary, and this person who was given the cold shoulder because they didn't go into quote unquote real ministry, that is a perfect example of that hierarchy. The other part of your illustration that I think is really helpful is the idea of, so what really was the vocation or the work that mattered to God? Was it the building of the houses, or was it the stewardship of the resources that opened up universities in Africa? And I would say, well, the answer is yes, right? Because so on the one hand, if you're someone in work and you earn an income and such, you are to steward that wealth well for kingdom purposes, and that includes, generosity, includes, using it to advance God's purposes in this world. But I would also say, don't look past the fact that this person is building houses, right? I mean, houses themselves are a way they're a way that God answers our prayers for shelter, right? In other words, we all need homes, we need places to live, and so a person that builds houses well, that even in and of itself, even before you get to the part about, well, they're generous with the income that they make, the fact that they're building houses, that itself matters to God as much as the way that they're stewarding the resources.
Absolutely.
Right?
Now, could you take that to an extreme though and say, well, what if somebody is the pornography king of Portland, and he makes a ton of money and he gives a ton away to the church through his pornography? So I mean, at what point do you draw that line?
Right, and there's always that question, right? It's work is not, you can't just say, well, everything that generates income is actually of value to God. There are things that I think are not, and I had to make that clear in my dissertation too, that hey, there's some work that Christians just shouldn't be involved in. Right? Now, this is a whole other tangent, and I'll only touch on it here unless you want to go further down. But I think there's kind of a spectrum, right? You've got the pornography industry that objectifies women and promotes and encourages sexual immorality and such, and that's pretty clear Christians shouldn't be involved in that. Then you've got things like, well, what about the Oregon lottery, right? Because our tagline here in Oregon is it does good things,
but it
right?
also does a lot.
But it also does a lot of other not so good things, and it sort of so. Sometimes, and I have my own personal convictions about that, but which are probably not real well informed, but so that's why I won't go too far down that. But the point is, yes, of course there are things that as Christians we just shouldn't be involved in. There's work that we shouldn't be involved in. There's sort of ways that God would not approve of us doing those things, and but then once you mark that boundary, then there's a ton of other things that are really, really where the work itself matters to God and is of value. And and to bring that back to your initial question, do we work to live or live to work? I would say it's in a way it's neither of those. It's actually a third alternative. In other words, if we're saying we work to live, what we're really saying is the ultimate goal or value is having a good time, right? Going out on the weekend. You put in your 40 hours and then you do that so that you can buy nice things. Yeah. You do that so you can take really nice vacations. It's a means to an end, which is usually pleasure, or if we're being maybe really honest, self-indulgence, right?
Yeah. A hedonistic
kind of approach. And the thing about that is people actually, it works for a little while, but people generally find that to be unsatisfying, right? It's, there's a book in the Bible that talks about that, meaningless,
yeah.
where, even the work that I was doing the pleasure, it satisfies you for a little while, but long term, it sort of leaves you disappointed.
Well, that's called the Stoics call that the hedonistic paradox, where if you don't get whatever you want, you're frustrated, but if you get all the desires of your heart, you're bored, because it's like, well, what am I going to do now?
I mean, it sort of makes the argument that what is left but to eat, drink, and be merry.
Mm-hmm. Well, under the sun.
I mean, under the sun,
there's
nothing.
That's a pretty important phrase, right?
But there is so I see it as I think it's a false dichotomy. I mean, I think we would agree on that. Mm-hmm. But one of the things I always go back to is I look at the beginning of Genesis, and so it says we're made in God's image, and I think this has been a foundational point. I don't separate work and vocation, life. I think they're all intertwined. And the reason for that is and maybe this is where you were going, so if this is just, you can just say, yeah. But a lot of people say, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? Well, clearly it's not that we look like him, right, but that there's, I ask my kids this, what did God do? Well, he created. And what have humans done? They've created. And so fundamentally built within us is this idea to create, to invent, to work, to build society. That's a fundamental unit of what it means to be made human. To build cultures, to have different. I'm so thankful that there's different cultures, because I love different cultures, and I love different ethnic foods. I mean, the food of the world is amazing, right? Absolutely. I am not like meat and potatoes. I want all the different kinds of food. And so, to me, it seems right from the get-go, it was a plan of the human race was meant to flourish. It was meant to create. It was meant to develop. We were meant to make iPhones. We were meant to do all the things that we do within the bounds of not exploiting people, not. Right.
Sure. Of the moral framework of God's kingdom.
There's a moral framework, and yes, that was the direction I was going. So, because I think that's exactly right. So my critique of work to live is that assumes that we're made for pleasure, self-indulgence, etc., and that ultimately falls apart. The other option that we talked about is, well, you live to work, whereas your work is your everything.
Yeah.
And there's where you find people that you build your identity on the status that work gives you, the titles that it might give you, the wealth that it might bring you, all or your sense of accomplishment. This is all the things. Look at all the things I've got done in a day, in a week, in a career. And actually, people, I think, at the end, find that crushing, right? Because in some ways, you never live up to that either, or you sort of get there for a little bit, and then it's like, well, yeah, but now I need to make partner, and now I need to. So
it's that person who has all the money they could ever need but can't retire. Like, why? They don't know what else to do, because their whole identity
their sense of who they are is entirely wrapped up with their work. Now, so those are the two sort of false assumptions, and the idea is, so do we have to try to balance those things out? And I would say no, actually. I would say there's an entirely third alternative, which is what you're getting at. So to be made in the image of God, I think is one of the primary things that I think it means is to reflect his authority. Right? So in ancient world, you have what kings would do is they would put their images up around their kingdom as a way of marking their territory, their sphere of influence. So when the Bible says, okay, you are made in God's image, that's actually a way of saying, in part, among other things, it's a way of saying you reflect God's authority in this world. And so he puts Adam and Eve in this garden paradise. And he says, fill the earth and subdue it. And So filling the earth, usually refers to, it's going to take more than just the two of you. You've got to expand out, which I don't think, by the way, necessarily applies to every single person, meaning that every single person has to have, 5, 6, 7, 8 kids.
Or if you're infertile for some.
Right, that's right. But it does apply to the human race. The idea of the human race is to expand out over, right, in the broad strokes. But that's, I wrote a book about that. We can talk about that another day. But the other part of it is the idea of cultivating the earth. Now, if you've done your Hebrew word studies on that word subdue, you find it's actually a very forceful word. And it carries this idea of saying, okay, paradise is there, the Garden of Eden is there, but the rest of the world is undeveloped. It's uncultivated. There's a lot of potential there.
It's a lot of raw material.
It's a lot of raw material, but it hasn't been yet developed. Yeah. The potential of that needs to be brought out. And so that is the task that, so God, the very first thing in all of Scripture that God does, Eugene Peterson says this, he says, and others as well, but Eugene Peterson says on the first page of Scripture, God shows up as a worker. Right? God's an employee, not an employee, but he's getting things done.
But he's creating ex nihilo. I mean,
he's creating
although you can make the case, depending on your view of Genesis 1, that it's actually not. It's removing the imperfections of the world that were already there, the existing. I mean, he did create ex nihilo at once, but it's also refining it to make it suitable for human habitation.
Notice the way that Genesis is structured is it's
a blank canvas. I think is what you're getting at, Rob.
Yes,
which is
that's right.
And there's a certain element of wildness.
The raw material is there, and it needs to be refined.
So if you pay attention to the structure, there's 6 days of active work, right? And the first 3 days are separating stuff. It's light from darkness, it's sea from dry land, and so on. And then the next days are filling that. So and there's tons that have been written on that. That's really, really good stuff. Absolutely. And for the sake of this discussion, we're not really focusing on is it a 6-day thing? Is it a millions of years thing? That's an interesting discussion, but it's not really relevant here. We're just saying that what God doesn't he speaks, but there's also the work of separating. God separated light from darkness, and so there's that idea of God is working. He could have just thought, and everything could have been there exactly as a finished product, but he doesn't. He's sort of going through this process, and that then becomes, I would argue, the template for what we do. I mean, so much of our work it's creating order, it's creating structure, it's developing what's in the world already and bringing out its full potential so that the world flourishes.
It doesn't just happen.
Yes, that's right.
God worked through the process of
violently. It's organizing chaos.
Yes, it is. That's right. That's absolutely right. And then
Jordan Peterson wants to know your location.
Oh,
Jordan Peterson.
Oh, tell him.
That's a lot of things.
Yeah, no, that's
I didn't know that.
I got it.
To quote Nietzsche.
Anything, Jordan Peterson makes a big to-do about taking the chaos of your life and organizing it and the personal responsibility that it takes
that fits very well with
speaking of Canadians.
We're talking about, right? Yeah, that's right.
He's Eastern Canadian.
He's Eastern Canadian, and he's been spending a lot of time in Russia these days, actually.
Interesting.
But that's a whole other thing. But then you so one more thing, and then which is okay. So after God sets Adam and Eve about to do this, sin enters the world. Right in the Christian story, we talk about sin being a distortion and of what has been created, and so then you'd have to add into the whole idea of work. You have to add there's sort of the work of mitigating the effects of sin, right? In other words, doctors and nurses probably wouldn't have been necessary had sin not entered into the world, right? So there's a lot of work that falls under that, but then there's so much more that falls under, what is it about creating order and structure and beauty in even in a perfect world. In other words, Adam and Eve had sin never entered into the world, we still would be called to work. Yeah. Right?
There's things to be done.
There's stuff to be done. And some would argue, in fact, I think I'd count myself one of them, that even in the new creation, Christians talk about the new heavens and the new earth, it's not going to be the Caribbean vacation. Yeah. But there will be work to be done still. We'll still have a sense of vocation. Now, there's discussion about that. Heaven. Yes, I would love that.
No,
right?
Like walking's That's old
so
school.
old school.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no,
What's
I
this?
show up and I'm like, let's get now. Where's my flying?
Well,
stuff?
if we do, to your point, if we agree that we will be fully human as we are meant to be, we will revert back to this point of glorified work, where it won't be perilous, futile toil as we so often experience in this world.
Right.
It will be the fullness of seeing the fullness of creation once sin is removed.
right.
So. What I don't want to just sit around on a cloud and float around all day.
Well, and think about it too. The biblical description of the new heavens and the new earth focuses on a city. Now, what is a city? Well, a city is a place where there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of cultural activity, and we read about.
And it's a product of a vision,
and it's a
creative vision.
And by the way, here's what the other thing I think is really, really crucial. That city described in the book of Revelation 21. Is a city that has the tree of the knowledge of good and evil right at the center of it. Now that's really, really important, because where does history begin? Well, it begins in this garden, which is an undeveloped city.
Yeah.
Hey, and we just got the city up there right on time, right? Perfect.
Brilliant.
You have an undeveloped city, which is a garden, and then history is on this trajectory towards a developed garden or a city, a culture. And so what I'd say then is that even now, we today are in between that garden and that city, right? We're sort of somewhere in that process of developing creation, bringing out the potential of culture, but the effects of sin are dramatic, and they are, in so many, they're all over the place. And so, even the work that we do, even the very best work that we do, is frustrated by the effects of, selfishness and pride and exploitation and so on and so forth.
Well, we could go on this for hours and hours, but since we have 30 minutes left and you want to be respectful of time, I want to kind of tying this into the contemporary perspective. So what inspired me, I mentioned the impetus for the question, what inspired me particularly to dive into this today in light of current events, in light of the COVID world that we're living in, was an article that I read. It was back in April, so it wasn't too long after a lot of the lockdowns, a lot of the shutdowns went into effect, and you had the debate between, and again, people put this as a dichotomy, you're either all the way on one side or all the way on the other. Either you want no restrictions, you just want to make money and open the economy up, and you don't care if grandma dies, you don't care who dies, that's their problem, or of let's shut everything down, right. We have to do everything we can to save every single life, who cares about the economy, all that. And as I hope that we're smart enough to realize that in all these issues, obviously, it's more nuanced than that.
There's no meme for that, right?
There is no. Well, people want to reduce it to
I know
a
there
meme,
are, but it doesn't work,
exactly. Right? And there's an article that I saw posted, and it was a gentleman, I forget exactly who wrote it, I apologize, I'll try to dig through it, and he was writing from a faith-based perspective, this idea that if you reduce those, he wasn't even saying, let's just have a blanket reopen to the economy, but he said one of the false arguments you see is that people wanting to reopen it are just looking for capital. They're just looking for financial gain. They want more stuff. You're telling them they can't work to get money to buy stuff, so they want to go back to work so they have more stuff, so they can have a bigger IRA. Yeah, exactly.
Well, even if we frame that even more charitably, which is, well, you just want to go back to work because you need to get money to pay the bills. I mean, that's a more charitable, but I would even say that's not. There's more that we need.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And he makes the argument that well, one, from a biblical perspective, yes, human life, biological life should be preserved. We should, we recognize that this world is not our home. These bodies are not, what we long for. But at the same time, we should work to preserve and protect life until the time God calls us home. But he said there is more to Christian virtue and morality than simply staying biologically alive. Right. God cares about so much more than just being biologically alive. There are some people I know that are biologically alive, but you could argue they're not doing much living. Right. And I would say if I get to that point, I'm okay not being biologically alive anymore. That's another story. But so he says if that's all we focus on as Christians is just staying biologically alive. And he says death is always going to be a reality, whether it's COVID, whether it's whatever. We can't prevent everything. So he says there's more to virtue than just being biologically alive. And he talks about from the economic, well, I'll just wrap up here really quick. He talks about from the economic sense that you might look at somebody who wants to reopen the economy so they can start their business up to get money, again, to buy stuff, or even to be noble, to pay their bills. He says that's so much more than just capital to buy things or purchase things with, to a family that started a business several generations ago and it's been a family restaurant. Richard, your dad moved here to America, speaking not a lot of English, and I'm guessing not with a ton of means, and worked and built up a restaurant that is his, that he worked. That represents so much more than just
entire life savings.
Exactly. I represent so much more than just a paycheck. There's more to just working than earning a paycheck. There's dignity, there's honor.
It's also
there's a lot of things.
I think it's well, first of all, like I don't know if everyone would describe it like that. Maybe he was responding to particular things, but it seems pretty self-evident that to take, like, if you value somebody, to take away something they've worked their whole life for and say you can't have it is, I think, I mean, that's
remove their ability to utilize, or even if whether it's a business owner, whether it's just something
right,
you do that you're passionate
about. There is something like if you were to put it in the negative and say, well, you just want to go back to work and you don't care about, I think that's an uncharitable view. But the other view of like, well, how dare you try to like take away my rights? The conversation that I've yet to hear, and I really think needs to be had because it is two extremes, is give me a way that I can do my business, that I can fundamentally survive, that I can keep my dignity, that I can keep working, and also keep people safe. And provide those things. And if it's, well, you just have to shut down, and that's not that conversation. The conversation might be, okay, you need to sanitize everything. There's these particular things you must keep social distancing. And for a long time, there was no discussion of that. It was just, we're just going to shut down. That's the end of it. And there's always in every policy, there's unintended consequences, whether they're good-hearted or bad-hearted. There's unintended consequences, and the unintended consequences were not thoroughly reviewed. And this is the problem. If you think about these conversations as a table, not everyone got a seat at the table. And people needed to have a seat at the table who could voice their concerns, and you could address everyone's concerns. And at the end of the day, if you're somebody who's very much like, I don't want to go to a barbershop and get my hair cut, don't go to a barbershop and get your hair cut. But if there's a way that person can keep his business, that he's worked really hard, that is probably propping up communities, keeping people out of homelessness, keeping people able to feed themselves, there's a very, it seems like, important and responsibility to your citizens to say, we need to have a thorough discussion, this is where it comes down. It's like if you just pick a party, you kind of know where they're going to land. And I think that's irresponsible. It needs to be everyone come to the table, let's talk about this and address this.
And I'd say a couple of things. I mean, so I'm not an expert on COVID policy in that, and I would say part of the challenge here, of course, is that this was thrust upon us really quickly.
It's the unknown. Right? Yes,
so, to have a conversation is ideal where everyone gets a seat at the table, but some of this is like this came up really rapidly, and so you've got to talk about this and adapt and move very quickly to make changes, and so you're not going to get it all right. The other thing I think is what you guys have both been touching on, I think is really, really important, but I even want to develop it a little bit more and say it's not just about the fact that when the economy shuts down, people lose their livelihood. That's a huge part of it. And that has implications in terms of the flourishing of society, right? As Christians, I think we're called to, there's this in the Old Testament, you've got people in exile, and they're in this foreign land, and they're in pagan culture, and yet God comes along and says, you know what, you pray for and work for the flourishing of community. And even in Babylon, even when you're in a culture that doesn't think like you, doesn't worship like you, doesn't have the same ethics and morality as you do,
contribute to the
and seek it and pray for it. So the importance of a flourishing society is so vital, and I think when we look at COVID, I think threatened all of that. Obviously, the situation is a little different than exile in Babylon, but still. But the other thing that I think is related is what COVID took away, and when the lockdowns first went into effect, was not just livelihood. It wasn't just the economic devastation, but it was also the ability or the opportunity that people had to do work that has meaning, right? In other words, so you can't go out if you're told that you run a restaurant, or you are a hairstylist, or you are a teacher, and all of a sudden you're hindered from doing that. It's not just the economic impact that that you lose out on, but it's the fact that now you are not able to do what you are created to do.
Yeah.
And that's a real, I think, difficulty for people.
Well, and Richard, and along those lines, you mentioned a key word that I want to dive into here: dignity. And I think that is a very key argument here, that there is dignity and there is honor and there is a sense of being human in working. Because a lot of people, and it's been interesting to see the dichotomy of people. You tend to see people who are really advocating for much stricter lockdowns. Not everybody, but tend to be either, older, which obviously from a physiological standpoint I get, they're much more settled, but they're also retired in many cases, aren't working a job right now, so aren't going to be nearly as impacted. Or we work with a lot of students, young people who've never worked a job, who are like, oh sweet, I get a $1,200 check for doing nothing at home. I'm cool with that. Right. That tend to argue for that, and it's easy from that perspective, but they say, well, let's just.
They got the check one time.
Well, yeah, they're probably going to get it again.
That saved anybody.
They're probably going to get it again. But
I don't think that saved anybody.
But the idea that, okay, suppose in a Pollyanna world there is like this Scrooge McDuck money pit of trillions of dollars, which it's not. It's like they print this money out of nowhere. But they say, okay, we will give you everything you normally would have had.
Scrooge McDuck is an old cartoon figure.
It's a new cartoon now, too. They brought it back.
From the 1980s, and it's been brought back.
That's one of the
It's like Darkwing Duck, I think.
Duck, yeah.
It's one of the cartoons I love watching with my boys. We can actually watch together, and I enjoy. But yeah, suppose there really was this money, which they're not. They're printing it out of nowhere, and they say, okay, we are just going to give it to you. You can stay home. We will give you the exact same money you would have lost. That doesn't just solve the problem. I mean, yes, it's better to have that.
It doesn't create value.
It doesn't create value because it's like it's one thing. Yes, I have the exact same, exact same capital, but I don't have the dignity.
It's not neutral either. I mean, it's actually detrimental.
Yes.
And this is so to go on a.
Well, would then people use their time to do other things? So
There's a way. Well, I think to be charitable, there are those who would argue that the right. See, my issue is that generally the money always gets in the wrong hands. For example, to prevent a housing crisis right now, the people who need the money are the people who literally don't have jobs, can't make their mortgage payments, but probably aren't getting the help. Yeah. And so it's, if you just gave everyone a flat check, I don't know that you'd solve the problem where we really need targeted, okay, let's not let the housing market fail. Let's not let these things fail. And let's hold that up. You could do that and at the same time say, let's also let people try to create try to stay afloat, but give them responsibility to say, like, you need to take this seriously.
Right. So some of that has been used to argue, say, for like a universal basic income, where you just sort of give people, and then hypothetically, $1,000. Actually, it's quite a bit more than that, but in any case,
Finland tried it and failed.
Yes, and part of the difficulty there is, again, it now on the one hand, you're right, it could encourage people to do stuff that now I don't need to get paid for it. I'm freed up to volunteer. Maybe that's true, or maybe it's not. I don't know. But I think it's a double-edged sword. We assign value and dignity and essentially a price tag to work, which has its ups and its downs. I would also say that this sort of works into how do you approach the problem, say, of homelessness and poverty. And I would say the much harder fix, and it's not always possible, and I'm not an expert, and I certainly don't play one on TV, but somehow it's not enough to just give people the money that they need, so that or put them in places where they're getting all their needs met automatically. Now, in some cases, that probably actually needs to happen.
In very short term.
In short term, or even in longer term, where you have people who's there's mental illness and there's other those factors in, so that complicates it. But otherwise, you need to do something so that people are equipped to fulfill the purposes that God has given them with the gifts. Yeah, that's right. Or helping, and that's harder. That's much harder to do. That's a long-term, and it's not politically sexy.
We talk about this. We have an abundance in American society today. In many cases, it's a lot easier to give stuff than to give the ability. It's easier to give fish than to teach people how to fish, because we usually, oftentimes, have quite a bit of fish to spare.
Right. And giving fish makes us feel good about ourselves.
And it's a quick, easy thing. Here's a fish.
There is, I mean, I think, we're kind of going off into talking about economic policy rather than, but I think there is value in creating a system in which people can succeed in the small business world. And one of the things I'm concerned about is that we are getting to a time and a place like where conglomerates can just destroy everybody and win, where the economic policies aren't targeted towards making sure local business people can have a seat at the table in a way that is advantageous for them. So that we develop a culture where people are starting businesses, inventing, doing the type of things, doing the type of things, even incentivizing local businesses to hire more people, to pay better wages. And you have to incentivize them, not just require them to do it, but incentivize them to do it.
You have to make that a more desirable option.
Right.
Yeah, that's been one of the I think one of the things that we've seen, probably arguably since the Industrial Revolution, maybe more so in more recent terms, is this growing disconnect between the work and the finished product, right? So, you know, and I'm certainly not arguing that we should go back to the way it once was, but the way it once was, you had your small family farm where you plant the grain, you have the animals, you bring it, and that leads to, so then you harvest the grain, you bake the bread, and you're sustaining your family, and then you have a little extra and you buy and you trade and so on. Well, we've obviously moved away from that, thankfully, right? You go to the grocery store now, and for less than $1, you can buy that loaf of bread because there's large factories behind it, and there's, the downside of that is you end up creating these massive corporations, organizations. It's whether it's in the agricultural sector, whether it's in other industries as well, and that can sort of depersonalize work, which I think is a drawback. I mean, I think that's unfortunate when that happens, and of course that was a critique of Marxism, which then went in lots of bad directions to try to remedy that. But the critique itself was probably worthwhile critique.
Well, I would love, in the time we have left, I did want to touch on this. So we joked earlier. So, Rob, you grew up in Canada, and so you've kind of been between two different cultures on this issue. And I think there's a lot of Americans that have this view of Canadians, anybody outside America, these crazy wacko leftist socialists who just want to sit around and collect their entitlements from the cradle to the grave. And that's obviously a gross misconception. But there is a different, I think, and you could speak to this, there is a different communal sense, and obviously different economic practices and different societal values, between the two. So from your perspective, is there this idea that, Americans have it wrong, and we have this sense of, the Wild West, every person for themselves, if you can't pull your weight, then that's on you, and you guys just, because I think a lot of the world does think that America lives to work, and that it's all about just getting as much as you can, and they don't have the sense of communal well-being.
You got. I was talking to Daniel about this earlier, how important stability is in the ability to build a prosperous society. Stability, in fact, you can still see it on the board there. You see I wrote it up there, and I was making a point about how stability is. So one of the problems in a lot of other countries is the lack of stability. So that if you're a small business owner and you start a business and you put literally everything you have into it, and then war, famine, people come by, destroy it, whatever you want to talk about, COVID, and you lose everything. How do you restart from that? How do you, there's no forward. And so if you employed, let's say, 4 or 5 people, well, then those 4 or 5 people now also have,
it's a ripple effect.
It's a ripple effect, and that affects housing. It affects everything, and so, in my mind, the more you can do to stabilize things.
So one thing we haven't talked about either is the amount of movement we've gone from corporate America to small business ownership within the last 10 years.
Right.
It's a significant difference between the 50s, 60s, 70s, where you go to corporate America, industrialized, to entrepreneurial, small business owners.
It was interesting. I think one of the things I heard Andrew Yang say, he's the only one who I heard talk about it, was that the economy in America is drastically changing from a production economy to a technology. And it's changing because it changes the way low-skilled workers have a place at the table, because they're not producing things like they did before. I haven't heard anyone else talk about it. He's the only candidate who actually I heard talk about that and actually understood the complexities of it.
Yeah, I would just like to get your thoughts on that. Like, is the perspective the same? It's just from your experience. So in Canadian culture, is it the sense of, there is dignity and there's the same sense of dignity and honor and work. That rugged work ethic that supposedly America was built on, at least, that is still present there somewhat today. Is it viewed the same, or is it a different moral perspective?
I have to preface this by saying I've lived in the United States longer than I ever lived in Canada.
Okay.
I've been in America 22 years, and I was 19 when I left Canada. So so I never really got into. I don't know as much about Canada probably as and I say that because whatever I'm going to say now, then if my Canadian friends or family watch this, they'll tell me, they'll just apologize. But
send you some Tim Hortons. And
then I should say it wrong because I'd love to get some Tim Hortons, which is a Canadian donut company. In case you
had it for the first time in Buffalo last year.
Yeah,
it was
good
solid.
Stuff.
Yeah,
I worked there for a year actually.
Nice.
So I'm the archetypal Canadian that did a year working as a baker at Tim Hortons.
Love it.
So here's my take. I think America is probably more driven in the sense of, historically at least. I do think that's changing, and I'm not quite sure exactly how yet, but I think there's something to that. But when you think of, especially in the last century or so, the drive to produce and to develop and to start businesses and things, I think you'd probably find that more in America. I think you might find a better balance in Canada historically. In terms of, we work and we value. I mean, Canadians are not a lazy people. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. I think they're actually very industrious and very hardworking. They might have a better balance between work and rest, and you might find, again, this is a theory, okay, so you might find that Canadians would be less inclined to make work an idle than you would in America. Now, I could be wrong on that, but that's just sort of my initial reading of it. Now Canadians have other issues, right? And there are other, I think, there's sort of a darker side. I think what I would judge to be a little more challenging, which is that you tend to get more regulation in Canada that might make it more difficult to start your own business, for example. And then there's other things that, Canada's not as socialistic as people think it is.
Yeah. Well, as some people think it is.
Some people think it is. Yeah.
Universal health care needs to be put into that category.
No, and that's a complex question too. Canadians, there's a two-tier healthcare system that develops that, if you're wealthy, you can afford more immediate care and maybe better care.
There's still inequality even in Canadian healthcare. Yeah.
It's a misnomer. Now this is sort of.
We should get a healthcare person in here, and we should do an entire show.
I love how
that would be super fun.
If you talk to Canadians about it, it's not an ideal system there either.
This kind of a rabbit trail, but a lot of young people again that we work with, they have this notion of, we should do it the way they do in Canada. And I'm not here one of these people who wraps myself in the flag and says everything America does is great, the rest of the world is stupid. I'm not trying to defend our entire system. I'm just saying the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And there's
I think also the number one
reason
reason for bankruptcy, which you can't file bankruptcy on in America, is health related.
Yeah.
Health and education.
And so if you want to position people to be in stability, I would argue there's a great argument to be made for some kind of system that prevents people from literally going into abject poverty because they had a health condition that they probably couldn't.
Right. Look, I just got out of the hospital 3 weeks ago.
Right.
I was in 3 days. It was nothing, not a huge thing, but it was enough that they had to keep me for 3 nights. And the whole time, I'm thinking, when the bill comes for this, what's that going to do for our family?
Insurance.
And I'll just be candid. I'm very thankful I get insurance through my church, but that premium is north of $20,000.
Right.
That's astounding. And then I have out-of-pocket costs that will be in.
Cannot purchase that kind of.
Exactly.
The flip side to that is I'm worried that the government will do a horrible job of financially right? Making it reasonable, like finding the right balance.
Right.
But I do think there's a great.
I can find all the problems. I have no solutions to offer.
Exactly.
And it's a complex problem.
Exactly. Well, and also to the point of culture, it's like there's so many reasons why a system may work in one cultural nation that you can't just go back and recreate and change the last several hundred years. You talk about kind of, there's a little more of a collective mindset in Canada.
That's really key. I mean, the idea of America is very much about the individual, which has its pros and cons. I mean, there's that, we historically have put a burden on the individual to say, if you want to be successful, you've got to go out, you've got to work hard, you've got to put in blood, sweat, and tears, and you might be successful. And the government, again, historically would say, we'll try to get out of your way as much as we can. But it's sort of every person for themselves. Canada and Canada thinks more collectively. And actually there's some really good things about that.
Well, then when you have 40 million people as opposed to
not even 40.
Yeah, as opposed to 330.
As opposed to 10 times that population. Yeah, I mean it's easier.
Yeah.
Americans are much more adverse to tax. Part of our country. I say our because I am an American. There was this whole I was just going to say, right. One of the things that was a catalyst for the forming of this country was the fact that, hey, we don't want to pay taxes on at least without representation. And so we are very adverse to just paying taxes. And actually, again, there's some good to that, right? You look in Canada, prices generally are higher. Your income tax is way higher.
Well, and I heard the average Canadian, just in healthcare, they do pay about $11,500 a year.
You do pay for your
so
health
it's not
insurance.
like it's free.
It's not free.
No, it's not free. The question would be, is it more economically?
Is it more economical? Is it more efficient?
Like could you? It would be interesting to get some studies, not just opinion, but studies that would say, with the way insurance rates are right now, most people that I know have a real hard time paying that. And is there a way that the government could do it for less? Or
we probably could. And this is, in a lot of ways, this is out of my depth. I mean, I'm not anywhere close to being an expert on healthcare policy either in Canada or America, but it is a fascinating question.
Yeah. So we got about 5 minutes left. So I would say let's kind of tie this all back to just this idea of work and the nobility of it. So I think we can all agree that there is more to life in God's economy. There is more to life than just pleasure. There's more to life than just obviously getting as much as you can. There's also more to life than just staying biologically alive, and just existing. That there is nobility in flourishing. So again, if we could just, God doesn't desire for us to, in this life, He doesn't create us to just sit back and magically have all our needs met without doing anything. Not because He enjoys seeing us struggle and have to strive endlessly, but that there's nobility in participating in the process of creating and flourishing. And when that's taken away, it's hard.
The purpose of being creators in God's image is that we ourselves create. Like we create societies, cultures, everything in between.
Everything, So I was walking through Winco, our grocery store in Salem a few years ago, and it was one of these things where the people that stock the shelves overnight, the companies that come in and unload their trucks, and so actually they were all behind. So the store was kind of a mess, and it was a little frustrating because you're trying to get through the aisles, But then it occurred to me that, okay, as Christians, we pray the prayer, give us today our daily bread. And so what does it take for God to meet that need, right? How does God answer that prayer? Well, obviously the bread doesn't show up in our pantry. It shows up because you've got farmers that are working the land, using the tools that other people have created, the tractors and the implements and stuff. And you've got truck drivers, and you've got bakers, and you've got you've got the store clerks, you've got, dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of people that are involved in that very simple way that God meets that need. So in other words, God answers our prayer for our basic needs through the labor of people. And not only that, again, because we said it's not just about getting bread so you can eat and survive for another day, but it's the beauty of culture around us. It's the beauty of we need beauty. We need everything from artwork to the ability to enjoy the great outdoors in national parks, and I mean it goes on and on. But we all play kind of a key part, albeit sometimes a seemingly very small part, but a very necessary part in God's desire to see creation flourish and to see culture developed and to see our needs met. Ultimately on that sort of that trajectory from garden to city.
So on that, you mentioned the arts, and I think that one of the questions you could logically raise is, well, what about somebody who maybe contributes something that doesn't necessarily give economic return, because I create, if I build cabinets, I sell my cabinets, people need my cabinets are going to give me something in exchange for it. If I art or a service that doesn't necessarily provide immediate economic transactional return but could still be beneficial to society, it's hard for us to want to put a monetary value on that. Like I say, I could spend 60 hours a week fashioning my hair into little figurines and selling it on the corner, and I could say, well, I work so hard for this, so you should give me money for it. The person says, yeah, but I don't want that. Exactly, I don't want to freely exchange goods and services. So where do things like the arts, like social services, like what'd you say? Video. Well, no, that's a valuable service that you provide. But I mean, things that don't necessarily, you don't see the immediate transactional return on it. Where should those fit into the economy?
I'll try to be brief in this. I think we have to.
It's over. It's fine.
We have to guard against the idea of sort of just utilitarianism, right? Where everything is the value of something is judged by its purpose, either its economic purpose or its function. Yeah. I've had the privilege a number of times of being in former Eastern Bloc countries in Europe, with Romania and Ukraine. And you can tell, you can look at the buildings there and you can tell when they were built, right? Soviet-era buildings are concrete blocks.
They're just efficient.
They're efficient. That's right. And then buildings that have been built since then, they feature...
reflect the people's desires.
Well, they reflect the people's desires. They reflect also just the importance of aesthetics.
Yes.
I mean, beauty itself has value. Now, Christians historically have had, especially in the last 50, 100 years, have not really held the arts in high esteem. Unless, and here's the thing, I did one...
Funded by the Catholic Church.
Well, right. I mean, that's right. And so I sat down with an artist as part of my dissertation and interviewed her, and we talked about the place of art. And she says, and I apologize if there's Thomas Kincaid lovers, but she says something like, a lot of times Christians have seen art, and unless it's a painting of the Bible story, a Bible story, or unless it's sort of a Thomas Kincaid sort of sentimental thing, we've kind of looked at art as, that's not, that's just sort of unnecessary. And like you say, if it's
directly represented in the art and Christian.
Yes, it's terrible.
It's horrific. And it's,
right.
Movies are awful.
Oh, they're the worst.
It's also the sense of just like, it's like even in music, like unless it's only singing about this, then it's, but all of life.
Right.
All of life is an expression of our experience, and so all of it would be included in that.
So you look at a guy like John Coltrane, right? Now his spirituality is really up for a lot of discussion and debate. John Coltrane, of course, was a jazz musician. And he actually has this thing in one of the liner notes of one of his Love Supreme album, where he talks about this experience that he has, kind of encountering the divine. And again, it's sort of nebulous what exactly he means by that. But it seems that he realizes the importance of creating music, jazz music, as a way of sort of reflecting the beauty of God himself. Yeah. If you listen to Leonard Bernstein, he makes a comment to the effect of, and he was an atheist, right? He's not a Christian, he was an atheist Jew. And he says something like, when you hear music, when I hear Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, you get the sense that all is well in the world. Harry Truman, who he was, a little, his faith again is a little, but he says something as well when he's probably more of a deist, but he makes a comment too about when you hear good music, you get the sense that all is right with the world. Yeah. And I say that not because music and art has to point you to a biblical story or has to sing about Jesus, but I say because good music and good art itself, the beauty itself, reflects the fact that God is a God of beauty.
Well, I heard something similar from a local guy who runs a studio up in Portland, and he's a musician up there, and he was talking about it on an interview with the radio. He described himself as an agnostic, but he said the reason I can't fully disbelieve in God is because of music. And he said this is something that doesn't provide any immediate, tangible benefit to your life. It doesn't put food on the table. It doesn't put clothes on your back. And he says there's no real scientific explanation for why music appeals to us. You can't boil it down to pure, physiological explanations, but yet we love it. And he says that's the reason he can't fully
get rid of the idea of a
Although
supreme
I would
being.
argue that actually when you look at good art, there's actually incredible scientific.
Yeah.
But here's
Why is it? Again, it doesn't provide any tangible.
but there's no benefit. I in my apologetics class in seminary, we had a thick textbook that was laying out all the arguments for God, and there are 20 of them, and I think it was like argument number 17 was one word with a short explanation. The argument was Mozart. The explanation, you either get it or you don't.
Yeah.
The idea being, of course, just the existence of good music that is beautiful points to and argues for the existence of a source.
Yes.
And so I would say everything that creates beauty has enormous value.
Beautiful flowers, both.
Right. Yeah. So anyways.
Well, we got a couple minutes here, so why don't we go ahead? So Daniel, do you have any final thoughts? We've kind of shut you down a little bit today.
I did have a couple of thoughts, actually, and it's totally unrelated to the beauty. I mean, I could talk about beauty, music, and everything like that too, but I was thinking about this throughout as we were talking, and we're sitting in our state of opulence in comparison to the rest of human history, and talking about how the idea is to thrive and that there's more to life than just working to survive. But then a lot of people would come back and argue that the majority of human history has been survive to the next day. And the idea that we can sit here and think about how there could be people that don't work within our society, and we have to wonder and grapple with the idea: do they deserve to live even if they do not contribute to our economy? That's unheard of 6,000 years ago, right? If you don't,
many parts of the world today.
So, but we live in a state where we could say well, maybe you don't have to work. Maybe there is extra money and resources that could support you, and you don't actually have to work. That's
To that point.
Yeah, I would make the argument that I think the stimulus should be to create tax policies and other things that help people put everybody in a position where they can work and make a dignified earning.
Right. I would agree.
And I think the tax policy should encourage business growth. It should encourage increasing wages. If there was a trade-off program of, hey, guess what? You get a big discount on your tax things if you pay your workers more than the average going rate.
Yeah.
Hey, there's all sorts of options on the table. Very few of them ever get discussed.
Yeah, and I would say too that this is one of the things that kind of came up later in my research is that one of the ways that small business owners can really have an impact is by, say, hiring people that others might not want to take a chance on, right? Yes. So you hire the guy or the gal who's the ex-con, and you say, look, we want to help you flourish as well. And there's a lot of places where felony on your record means you're not going to get a job there. But
there's actually a local company, shout out to Gardner.
Yeah.
Gardner Services.
Yep,
yeah,
absolutely.
so they take all sorts of stuff like that, and they do tremendous work in the community. And I think that's one of those businesses that should be, they give people opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have them.
To help them
and
get
so,
back.
if there could just be a way to say, hey, these are the kinds of things we want to continue to, while still allowing for excellence.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Hand ups, not handouts.
Well, I don't know if I would say that.
To bring a cliche.
That's your cliche
That's
for next week,
Garrett's
right?
cliche.
That sounds good.
It's not always
the ending cliche of the day.
I don't know that that's always
next week,
the way.
Next week we're going to debate why everyone hates people back.
I think that's.
We're finally going to get to it.
I feel like that's sometimes disingenuous to say a handout, like everyone's lazy. Not everyone who's had a bad hand in life has been lazy. Sometimes there's extenuating circumstances, and so, literally, you're somebody who gets cancer and it bankrupts you. Yeah. That's not you were lazy or that's just there's a lot of nuance there that I think needs to be.
I think I could say the disconnection is at the root of so many the majority of human problems is not knowing people as individuals and social media has only made that so much worse, where we associate and we know people from their likes on Facebook, from the bumper stickers on their car, from their associations rather than as individuals. So
they don't know. They won't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah, that's a good note to land this plane on. So
Thank
Rob,
you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining us
Thank
today.
you for having me.
It was
my privilege.
Yeah, well, like I said, we could talk for hours and hours. Hopefully, we'll have you back here at some point.
I would love to come back.
Thank you for
Talk
clicking
about
all
whether
those
Tim
buttons
Hortons
and
is
stuff
better than
that you
Krispy
do over
Kreme.
there, Mr. Oz.
Yes, thank you for making it happen. Shout out, Daniel.
Although you should have a curtain if you're going to be Oz.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe on the curtain. And as always, if you guys have any comments or questions, feel free, or criticisms, feel free to leave them in the comments section on the podcast page or on YouTube, or if you have suggestions for future shows, or if you're interested in being on, we'd love to have you. So for all of us here at the Agora, big shout out, by the way, to Salem First Baptist Church for allowing us to film here. Thank you so much. We hope to see you all again same time next week. Go enjoy the sunshine and be safe.
Thanks.